everybody, and welcome to the chat of PR Asia 2020. Today, I have two special guests with me. My name is Jamie Lee, and I'll be your host. Today, we have Fritz Quinn, the Vice President of Public Affairs and Communications for American Express Asia. And we have the lovely Becky Cho, Vice President and Corporate Affairs and Communications of VFC APAC. Hi, Becky. Hi, Quinn. How are you?
Hi.
Very good. Well. Hi, Jamie. Hi, Fritz.
Maybe we can start off by having Fritz introduce himself and a little bit more what he does at American Express.
Sure. My name is Fritz. I run affairs for American Express, Asia Pacific. I always tell everybody my job is to make good great and make way. And no 2 days are the same, but largely looking after all the media communications, PR, philanthropy, and as well as lobbying activities from Japan down to New Zealand and to India, and then everything in between.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Fritz. What about you, Becky? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I think we have a very similar role, and in this capacity, I work for VF Corporation in Asia Pacific, so leading the corporate communication team. My role include both internal and external communications and also stakeholder engagement. I look after about 14 markets within Asia. We are a manufacturing chain, so we produce our own products within Asia Pacific. And so there's also the manufacturing side of the business that I also oversees.
Great, awesome. You have some very interesting brands that you're working with. Can you tell us a little bit about them?
Yeah, no, I am excited to share with your audience the brands that we are producing and also marketing. In Asia, the focus is on Vans, which some of our audience would have heard of it, and also the North Face.
Yes.
Dickies, Kipling, which is a travel product. Icebreaker, which actually is design and manufacturing, originated from New Zealand, but we also market it here in Asia Pacific.
Right. These are some brands I think a lot of us are very familiar with. I'm sure you agree with me, Fritz.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Awesome. So now, coming back a little bit about you as a person, Fritz, you. How did you get on board this journey to become a communications specialist?
Well, it was luck. I tell everybody, everybody who will listen, it's a great idea to have long-term plans for what you want to do, but just have that it will never ever go to plan, and things will always change. So I started off my career. I thought I was going to go into politics. I interned at the Department of Defense in college, and then when I left university, and then I ended up getting a job working for, kind of worked my way up through the ranks there, became a lobbyist, gas trade associate, and moved to American Express. And, I'd always known that living outside of the U.S. would be interesting to me. Hence part of the attraction to it. And it just ended up working there. In DC at Amex for years, and then a job came open in Sydney on the PR team. And so I ended up moving to Sydney and doing that, and that turned into a regional job, which turned into a job in Hong Kong. I spent 6 years in Hong Kong looking after Greater China, then Southeast Asia and Greater China, all of Asia. And I've been in Singapore for not quite a year. So it happened by luck, but as I said at the beginning, no 2 days are the same for me. I really love it. I never would have thought I'd been here, but here we are.
Awesome. So welcome to Singapore. It's been, as you mentioned, just a little under. It sounds very interesting how you started off as an intern in defense, and then you got on in the end with the finance industry. So that's quite cool, actually. What about you, Becky? Tell us your story.
Yeah, my story, I guess I resonate with what Fritz just said. I also started actually in the arts. So I have a creative background. The arts community is what I'm passionate about. And I felt, this is where I'm going to be for the rest of my shortly, not too long after, I've been in the arts. I've been in the capacity of Arts Foundation, the National Endowment. And so what happened is that during my days at the arts, I found that actually the arts often needs budget. Fundraising is pretty much front and center for everything you do within the arts. And out of that whole creative process and managing the creative process, I found that a very interesting mix, which is storytelling, which is making sure that whatever however great story you have, you need a budget and a business need to support so that you can push the story out. So then later on, I focused more on public relations within the arts because that's where we can make some real impact. And then later on, I was very, very fortunate to be offered opportunities to switch from basically out of the industry to go into an art foundation, then under a bank. And then outside of that, then I got invited to other corporations and in the capacity of corporate communication. But what's interesting, Jamie, is that out of all the capacities and in different industry, I always do the same thing, which is storytelling.
Awesome. So interesting. I think it's really interesting. Then three of us have something in common. We were in the finance industry, and Fritz is still in the finance industry. So thanks for sharing a little bit about how you came about your journey. And coming back to Fritz again, was there a role model that you modeled yourself against in the communications or PR field? Was there someone that you look forward to, like, I'm going to be as great as that?
I don't know. I've been very fortunate throughout my career to have worked. I've had the entire time. And one of the things that I love about APAC is that people, the culture lets you sort of grow, and a lot of people have stayed there for a long time. So when I joined APAC, I worked for the guy that ran our department, had been with the company for a very long time, had worked with really interesting characters on Wall Street and New York, and I mean, really just understood the whole picture very well. And at each stage of my career, whether it's in DC, Sydney, wherever, I've been very I've looked up to my leaders because training communication. It wasn't something, like I said, it wasn't part of the plan. So I didn't have any role models really coming into the job, but those role models have and that's been, so I feel very fortunate.
Right. Awesome. Fritz. What about you, Becky? What is your story? Was there somebody you aspired to become like?
Yeah, I do follow a few people, but to be honest, I think the PR profession, because it is a skill that encompasses so much different variety and diversity of our skills, that I tend not to focus just so much on PR profession, but outside of that. So I am a big fan of thought leaders such as Brené Brown. I'm sure some of you have had followed her because she's so inspirational in terms of her way of articulating courage, empathy, in that arena. Because I think as we become more mature in our role as a PR, we're basically a leader. And so in leadership, especially nowadays with COVID and the pandemic, empathy is such an important subject and topic that we should all learn more about. So so I tend to, obviously I think I want to also echo what you said. A lot of my PR professional role model comes from the leaders that I work with. And they are really inspirational in terms of working with them. I learned so much. But in terms of sort of a generic role model, I tend to look outside of the PR profession because I learn something from it.
Right. Awesome. I think I like what you're sharing with us, that, you know, a PR communications person does so much more, and therefore you actually, as role model yourself, aspire to be someone not just necessarily in the PR communications field, but someone outside of that, or business leaders. It's fantastic. So for those of you who are actually watching us right now, Asia is taking place this year from the 8th to the 11th of December. So the 8th, 9th, 10th, you'll find us running our conferences. It's all going to be virtual. So no matter where you are, you can join us. And 11th, we have this PR or proactive workshops. You got 4 workshops starting from 10 a.m. in the morning to 5 p.m. All of the timings are in SGT or Singapore time. Together with us today, we have Fritz and Becky. So they will both be appearing on the second day of the conference on the 9th of December. So Fritz will be part of a panel at 12:10. He'll be talking about the HO measurement conundrum, gets even more complex, very interesting subject matter. And Becky will be appearing at 12:50, where she'll share a case study on proving results by demonstrating communication's real impact on the bottom line, which is a really exciting topic as well. So back to Becky and Fritz, just share with us, how do you define this term PR ROI? Very big word. It's often talked about. What is PR ROI to both of you?
Becky, you want to take it? Go.
Yeah, so I have some thoughts around it. I think this topic has been you know, if you're a PR professional, this is something that probably take up a large part of your time, basically in terms of managing stakeholder understanding, expectation, company goals, whatnot. So I think we all, you know, if we're coming from the PR profession, I don't think I want to repeat what you're already doing. But what I do found in terms of philosophically, when we say that we defined PR ROI, I often found that is basically going back to the basic. The basic is, what is the business objective and what are we trying to deliver? At the end, business goal, right? Is the business goal that resonate with both your leadership and also with your stakeholder and your investor. So to me, I map out who are, you know, what are the goals early in the year and line up with my leader. And as long as we have an alignment on those return of investment as well as measurements. And you know what, I've been in different industry. I've been in automobile, tobacco, now in sports and in payroll. They're all very different. There's some commonalities, but they're also very different. And then in terms of the marketing, you know, in China versus in Hong Kong versus in, let's say, Bangkok or Thailand, those are all very, very different. So I would say, if I have to define, it's all about aligning with your leadership, about your business objective, and then you draw your own map in terms of what are the ROI.
Right.
Yeah, I don't actually like calling it PR ROI. You're looking, your objectives are the business objectives. So many times communications people can get sidetracked. We think are important or that we know might be meaningful to improve our brand. But if the business isn't, you know, you've got so much going on, you can't afford to focus. So I think, you know, having that alignment about what is the business to achieve. For us, is it more cards, more people knowing about who we are, and then you can work backwards from there to determine, all right, what are going to be the best channels, what's going to be the best messaging, how are we help to push that the most? Because proving the impact of PR on your bottom line is actually, it's not that hard. There's art involved, or some art, but more time you is focusing on training for your people, right? You need to make sure that you've got people who've got maybe a different mindset than what a traditional, you know, classically trained PR person might have been.
Very interesting thoughts. I guess it makes a whole lot of sense, you know, to understand where your business objectives are, and then, you know, coming back to the funnel to sort of align the, you know, communications ROI. Now, can you share with the audience here, how would you suggest that you can measure PR performance then?
There are tons of. Go ahead, Becky.
Okay, so I think, you know, there's a lot of buzzwords when it comes to fancy measurement, KPI, you know, and we all know it, right? Impressions, mentions, share voice, engagement rate. So like what Fritz just said, those things will come. Those are mechanisms, those are tools that we all need to adopt so that it help us do our job better. But if you don't get the first part of it right, which is the alignment of business objective, and also making sure your leaders understanding that some of these goals are longer term versus short term, What are some of them that are qualitative versus quantitative? And then what are some of the responsibilities sometimes that other functions need to do so that we can do our job to support them? I often found that we call ourselves a support function, and that's really not an underestimation of the importance of what we do. But however, we do support, because marketing and product development doesn't have the product and the project that we can PR around it. You can't create something from nothing. So I often found that the alignment with the business, supporting your functional partner, is the, and then just like what Fritz said, it will come. Your tools, your measurements, everything. Obviously, I'm not trying to underestimate how important to be analytical about our data, and to support us from more or better or different. But I also often found that my team sometimes would come to me with very fancy data and DAC and to prepare to share with leaders. And sometimes I would say to them, let's just keep it more simple, because at the end of the day, your leaders don't have a lot of time to go into fancy charts and numbers. They care what is the bottom line. And so we need to remind ourselves that I know we do a lot and we create a lot of data, but sometimes those data are only so good if you have the context behind it.
Yeah, sometimes aren't very good at communicating. One of the great ironies, because business leaders there's a big focus on data across all industries. And so I think sometimes we pick that up and we say, okay, everything has to include the following metrics. Becky, it's not appropriate. You have to, what is the business? We don't need to use all the time. And good communication comes from something that is concise and easily understood. And when you try and muddy the waters there, you can get in.
Yes.
I also like, Becky, what you said about long-term versus, and I've used time, but when you think about communication PR, here's an example. Study after study after study shows you that if you hug your kids, they will do right. They will be better. They'll be better adjusted socially. Their grades will go. All of these things are going to, are a positive benefit to them. Now, I can't tell you, like, if I hug one of my sons today, does that directly correlate to doing better on his test? You can't do that. But that's what PR is. PR is the hug. It's consistent performance over time and consistent message and behavior that ultimately is going to have an outcome. Now, there are short-term outcomes but in many cases, marketing is better for that. And you know what? That's okay. Like, that's why there's marketing and that's why there's communications. Sometimes that line is blurred and it's getting a little bit blurrier, particularly if you have with on the communication side. But helping your business to understand that, as Becky said, is really, that's part of our job too, making.
I think both of you have really come to an alignment or agreement. And I think I second what both of you are saying as well. I think sometimes sometimes people tend to be overzealous with numbers, reporting all kinds of metrics or indices or performance reports. And they just forgot about the whole big picture about meeting the business needs. And you're right, Fritz, some things just cannot be measured or quantified. Like you mentioned, the hug with your kid, the outcome is positive,
yeah.
but
it can't be measured so that you're actually doing the right thing. A few years ago, we did a test where we were trying to directly link communications activity and PR activity that we were doing to new card acquisition. And we did it. We were able to show that the card acquired was lower for people who had seen messages, and that's great. But if you looked at it overall, the number of cards that were pushed was not as big through marketing. And if you were to just stop there and look at it, well, maybe a PR is a cost-effective channel, maybe, but it's not necessarily an efficient channel. But as we picked it apart a little bit more, what we're able to find is that people who were coming to us through our PR activity, they were starting new applications, but they were abandoning them. Right. So what the most useful thing that we pulled out of that wasn't that people were seeing this and then applying for cards. It was that there was a problem with the application process that we then needed to fix, and that so that we could actually acquire people we were acquiring through more efficient channels were actually going to get through the door and be able to get a card. So sometimes you need to, you're right, that data is there. There's tons of it. And it's finding whether or not you're able to make sense of it. And we'll talk about this later, I'm sure, but you need to make sure you got the people on your team who can interpret that data. And it isn't the traditional skill set.
Thanks so much for your inputs, Fritz. Coming back to you, Becky, let's start off with addressing the era that we're in now. I think 2020 is a year where all of us feel, oh my God, it shouldn't happen at all. But it did. And in today's context, how is your role changed, or what is different about what you're doing now, taking into consideration the whole pandemic? Businesses are struggling, economies are struggling. What's different?
Very different. I actually have some specific examples to want to show on the exact difference that I'm pointing out. But before I go into the example, I think I heard somewhere, I can't remember where I read it or heard it, that people are calling this the Corona coaster. So basically,
so cool, okay.
Yeah, basically everything is virtual. We operate our business virtually. If you can imagine, we have brick and mortar. We have so many of our great product in the retail, in the brick and mortar environment. But then, we have to move online, and we already have online. The good thing is the e-commerce is always there to support, and we just pivot and make very strong, immediate business decision to help our consumer relate to us, worrying. And, while we're dealing with this Corona coaster, because every day is up and down that you have to deal with. What have changed for me most, especially from a PR perspective, is actually internal communications. So, and while we were talking about ROI and KPI just now, I actually also wanted to mention in our world, the world has changed so much. Fritz can probably relate to this. I think I'm old enough to say that maybe 15 years ago, when I'm doing the same job, internal communication will probably take a fraction of my time. Nowadays, I think the PR role in partnership with HR is becoming so critical, so important. And in the pandemic situation is even becoming much more critical to deliver that business results. As we were just saying, the objective, the business result, which most companies value so much, because your people is what you've got. And so people first are so important. How do you do that, right? We're not seeing each other. I mean, Zoom fatigue, 24/7. There are a lot of side effects from that roller coaster ride that the HR team alone cannot do it. They can't play magic. They can't, but we as the communication expert can really help them to define the channel, define the right time, the right place, what to say. And sometimes you don't want them to say too much, because we also have fatigue from emails, over communications. How do you simplify so much that at the right time, doing that messaging well? And I'll just pause here because I'm sure Fritz have a lot to say about that.
I agree with you, Becky. I think, to answer your question, what did communications, we are, at least as I think about others in the industry, we did exactly what we were supposed to do, and have performed very, very well, perfectly. But anytime you are in a crisis, the communications people are the ones who really need to take the lead. We're the only ones who see all the way across the business. We're the only ones who actualize what's in the world outside. And as Becky said, we need to help people know, is the right time to say something? When should you have a little bit of patience? I agree 100% on internal communications as well. You know, and maybe I have a variant view on this, but the crisis is over. Like, it probably ended in April or May. Since that time, we've been in an adjustment period, and that adjustment period is going to take a lot longer. But what it has really shown a light on internal communications and what internal communication can be. Because everybody, how are you going to tell everybody? How are you becoming more creative at people connect? And that's what I'm proudest about in terms of my team and across the world. Done such a good job in keeping everybody, keeping their spirits up, keeping people together, keeping people engaged. And in some cases, like, our engagement levels are higher than they were when everybody was in the office. So anyway, some silver linings to come out of this dark cloud.
That's really interesting. I think those are very valuable insights, because both of you are on the ground day in and out, and you guys can see, as you said, across the business. So coming back to the current day, what you're experiencing, do you feel that, while Becky has clearly mentioned that the PR communications function is a support to the rest of the business, but do you feel that there's still a gap or a silo between PR comms and then marketing, sales, and product people? Do you feel that in the other organizations you've been up to today, that there's always a little bit of, gap that needs to be addressed?
I'd rather say those gaps that you're referring to as not gaps, but more so, opportunity for alignment. So you can align as much as you want to. I always believe that. You take the agenda, you run with it as much as you want to. We can all work in silos. I mean, it's PR versus marketing. Sometimes it's finance versus marketing as well, right? So I think any time we have a matrix organization, we have the sort of global organization now. Basically, our China business is global. We don't look at it as China, we look at it as global. So when we do encounter us, positioning ourselves as what Fritz was saying, driving the company agenda, I think the silo actually, it depends on how you want it to be. I also don't believe in over communication. So, I'm not encouraging everyone to be always setting up meetings after for alignment. Alignment sometimes does not have to be meetings. Sometimes it's just about simplifying the process as well, to make sure that your functional partners or peers do not feel that, it's another PR call again, and I don't have time for that. And so really giving them the reason to be, providing that business need. Again, I'm very much always putting that business need really upfront, because I'm afraid we all sort of so stressed for all the agenda you have to fill, and they have their own agenda as well. One thing that I actually do, and it is a PR, but it's also not a PR, that I do, I'm very passionate about CSR and community work. That's my specialty. And so I do tend to wear a second hat or a third hat sometime to activate and do those. In our company, we call it purpose, because we believe that every associates and every of our employee have their own purpose, and the company have our purpose, and we have our guiding principles. Well, together, we want to fulfill ideals that we all have our purpose. And so in that part of the work, that's especially true, that if you don't actually reach out and align, people would think, why should I have that extra time to work in something that is really not at the bottom line of my business deliverable? So even there's another additional work that you kind of have to be mindful about. I would say really just being mindful, just being very careful about not overemphasizing, meetings and emails, but then being to the point and reaching to your stakeholder to make sure that they understand what you're doing.
Thanks, Becky. Fritz, what about you? What's your point of view?
Well, there's a lot in there. I think ultimately, again, all roads lead back to what the business needs to do. And in communications, as a partner function rather than a support function, there is a lot that we have to keep in mind. We have a couple different. One, we have the role of as an enabler, right? So we need to enable the business to do what it is the business wants to do. We also have a filtering role that we have. The business can't just do whatever it wants to do. One of my mentors, one of my bosses, she always used to say that we can sometimes be the filter on the end of the sewer. Bad ideas happen. So we have to find what that in order to help our business. Beck, talking a little bit about fatigue. I think one of the challenges for communications people, because we are seeing across business, sometimes we're eager to help. We see opportunities that we see, and as a result, we want to try and help the business and the brand, by taking advantage of all these things. Sometimes that's not appropriate. And, nobody likes being told what to do, right? So as we see these opportunities and you have to regulate, okay, maybe I could do a better job, or maybe I would do it differently. But right now is the time where I need to focus on, what is the most important. As Becky mentioned earlier about staying focused. It takes a little self-regulation. PR people are bad at that. I mean, just the way PR ROI, it's a skill that we all need to develop a little.
So thanks again, Fritz, for your input. I think that's very valuable. We talked a lot today and some very heavy subjects. On the lighter side now, I mean, you guys have been both in the role of communications for a very long time. What are some of the things, like maybe 3 pet peeves or things that you want to make sure colleagues, peers, bosses, or the industry gets right about PR and communications? Let's start off with Becky.
Okay, I did think about that question, so I have some very specific answers that I will share with you. The first is I get really frustrated when someone present an issue and said, let's PR around it. There's no such thing. I think, it's not my current environment. This is this environment. I liked for my partners in the business to stay with the truth, because PR is not about telling fairy tales. I like for them to work with me about facts and truth, so that I can help them to say the right thing by the right person at the right time. So that would be the first thing it would be my wish. And I've actually been able to achieve that here at the VF. The other thing is, I think communications require processes and teamwork. It's not a one person. So in the old days, you always felt like, oh, she's so professional, he's so professional, writer. And so there are people that expect, if I give you an issue or a subject, let's write it. That there's no such thing, because we already talked about it. We need to start with a business objective, and then back end, we have a lot of measurements to support why we decide what we decide. But no longer is it about somebody sitting behind a computer and start writing that piece of content and that's it, right? So I would hope that partners that work with me would understand that concept, so that we can work with each other better. Finally, I also love to say that noise is not result. Making noise doesn't cut it. We complicate things sometimes, over communicate sometimes. So just be really, really sensitive about what you push out. Less is better sometimes.
Yeah, when we talk about pet peeves, sometimes that list can be longer than 3. But Becky's right. So on noise, the one thing that bothers me more than anything is jargon. And noise is an example of jargon. One of the things you talk about, people who you look up to in communications. I pass around to my team every year. George Orwell wrote an essay in the 1940s about the quality of political speech. And he talks a lot about jargon, and jargon dilutes your message. All of these words, all of this corporate speak, it means something to us, but really it's just a sign of laziness. It's when your brain can't think of the most appropriate word or something that's going to be most effective with who you're trying to reach. You come up with something like synergy or strategy, or it just, and it totally loses the meaning of what you're trying to get across. So jargon really drives me nuts, and it's really hard when I talk about being the filter. Right, that's a place where communications people need to focus, because the business will come up with, here's something we really want to get across. You know, we really think this is important. Our customers need to know this, and it'll be kind of gobbledygook and unclear. Which leads me to my next point, which is about really needing to keep some good context and grounding for what it is you do. Your business people are particularly your sales folks, are very excited that what they have is the greatest thing in the world. But I work for a credit card company and have done for 14 years. I never think about my credit card. I don't. All of the things that, people are really going to care about this. People, there are certain points in time when people are thinking about their credit card or buying a pair of shoes. It isn't all the time. So what is most important to you at that given point in time is important to you, because that's what your business is and that's what you're being measured against. But most of your customers probably don't feel the same way that you do. So just kind of keeping that in mind. I say to my team all the time, we are not curing cancer. Okay? There are people who are doing that. It's not to say that what we're doing isn't important, but some things are more important than others. Going back to George Orwell. And then the last thing that drives me nuts is when people talk about spin, and Becky, you kind of hit on this too. I don't spin things. If you're spinning something, that means you're hiding the truth, and that's never a place that you want to be in PR. There may be times when you don't want to share the entire story, but if you're doing your job correctly and you're working for a brand and a company that has some integrity and is ethical, which I hope that we all are, spin is not necessary. It is what it is. And sometimes it's bad news. Sometimes it's news you don't want to share. Sometimes it's not as good as you want it to be. So don't spin it, just don't say it.
Fritz and Becky, you raised some really important and very good points. Especially, hey guys, if you are new to PR and communications, you're a newbie in the industry, I think Becky just gave some very, very important pointers. And hey, today we learned something new as well with Becky. It's called so that's new. Fritz, maybe before we end up the conversation, share with us about the topic that you're going to be talking about.
So I'm going to talk about, we'll go into a little bit more detail on measurement and really talk about some of the tools that are available and the way that you can expand your thinking in terms of, at the beginning of a project, how can you drive revenue targets? How can you drive sales targets? Where are the places that you can look, and where is that data available to help you inform whether or not you're looking at the right channel? And then also, most importantly, how do you package that so that your business can understand it? Because most business people aren't used to seeing PR and communications types talk in these terms and present information in this way. So I'm going to talk a little bit about practical advice on where to look and how to syndicate your ideas.
Right. Thank you so much, Fritz. What about you, Becky? Share with our audience, what will you be speaking on the second day of the conference?
Yeah, so my topic is also very similar. It's about delivering results. Is talking about how do you make sure that your project is delivering that results, and also making business sense from a marketing sales objective. I often found that there's an art and a science behind that. So the case study I'm going to share with the team actually have a very strong focus on going outside of the box a little bit and use creativity to leverage the storytelling that resonate with consumer. Because similar to marketing, it's the same thing, except that we are earned and not paid, and we create those storytelling, partnering with influencers, thought leadership forum to deliver that results. But it has a very strong creative solution and problem solving elements in the project that I'm going to share with everyone. So please join me, and I hope to share that story with you.
All right. Thank you so much, Fritz and Becky. And that's all we have for you today. But do stay tuned with us because we'll be having a little bit more chats with different speakers from the PR Asia conference. So once again, if you have not gotten your tickets at PR Asia 2020, it's time to do so. Thank you very much and see you guys.
All right. Thanks, Jamie. Thanks, Becky.
Thank you.